Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to another live stream. It's your host, Danny Haifong. We have a great show for you today, and we must begin by talking about both Trump and NATO are increasingly desperate and afraid as Russia meets their threats, which now have gone nuclear, with decisive action. Vladimir Putin, through Russia's foreign ministry, has lifted all self-imposed, this is a key word, self-imposed restrictions on the INF treaty, which Donald Trump pulled out of in 2019, remarking that the necessary conditions for its implementation have disappeared on the US and NATO side. So medium and short-range missiles can now be deployed, just following Trump answering Dmitry Medvedev's mean tweets with nuclear submarine deployment and threats, with claims that he is ready for nuclear war. Our guests, we couldn't have better guests to discuss the truth and the dangers of all of this. We have Scott Ritter, former U.S. Marine Corps intelligence officer and UN weapons inspector, now journalist, geopolitical analyst, and author. And we also have former CIA analyst Larry Johnson, who is also a journalist and geopolitical analyst. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me today.
Bom dia.
Yes.
Good day. Good day in Portuguese.
Yes. Well, let's talk then about these nuclear escalations. So here is the Russian Foreign Ministry's statement concerning the moratorium on deploying ground-based intermediate and short-range missiles. It goes straight to the point about the United States, basically that the fault lies at its feet, and that its self-imposed restrictions were not reciprocated by either the U.S. and NATO, with both showing and demonstrating that they are committed to escalating these short and medium range missiles. And then we also have this ongoing saga where Donald Trump, in a spat with Dmitry Medvedev on X, said that he was ready for nuclear war. Here is what he said.
When you talk about nuclear, we have to be prepared, and we're totally prepared.
So let's begin with you, Scott. You have been on the show many times sounding the alarm about the dangers of nuclear conflict between the United States and Russia. So where are we now, given Russia's latest announcement on the end of its own self-imposed INF treaty?
Well, let's first of all keep in mind that it was Donald Trump that pulled out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty in
2018.
August.
2018.
Right? So here we are. We're celebrating the, 7th anniversary of that stupidity. The Russians, reciprocated. But what the Russians said is that we will continue to abide by the INF treaty in terms of systems, so long as the United States doesn't deploy INF-capable systems to Europe. The United States did deploy a INF-capable system. It's a containerized system that can shoot both the SM-3, SM-6 missile, the SM-6 variant known as the Typhoon, which would be a short-range missile in the surface-to-surface mode, but also the same containerized system, a derivative of the Mark 41 Aegis Ashore system, can shoot the Tomahawk, and there's no way of knowing what missile is loaded in the container system at the time. So we deployed it to Denmark, I believe, part of a NATO exercise. We claimed that it only had the SM-6 loaded up, but it doesn't matter. The Russians went, we will now begin to actively do the R&D necessary to produce our missiles, and they began the production of something called the Oreshnik missile. And in November of 2024, Russia actually did an operational test of the Oreshnik, striking the Dnipro factory in Dnipropetrovsk, Ukraine. What we see happening now is simply the fact that the Russians have gone to serial production of the Oreshnik. And so now, instead of having, a handful of, handmade missiles, produced to do testing. They've gone into serial production, and they are producing missiles that are going out into the field, into operational units, and they have deployed the first operational units armed with Oreshnik missiles. When you deploy a system like the Oreshnik, it's deployed at the regimental level, meaning that you'll put a regiment. That means they have 3 battalions. Each battalion has 3 launchers. So we're talking 9 Oreshnik missile launchers minimum, already deployed at an operating base somewhere in Russia. Belarus has announced that it will be receiving the Oreshnik system by year's end, I believe. And so Belarus will also have a regiment of 9 missiles. They're getting 10 launchers because they're going to have their own training facility to train up the Belarusian troops. But the Oreshnik is produced at the Vodkinsk machine building plant. It's an SS-20 analog. The SS-20 is an intermediate range missile that was eliminated during the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, something I was involved in. At that time, we estimated that the Russians or the Soviets could produce 60 to 80 SS-20 type missiles a year. That was in peacetime Cold War production. Now the Oreshnik is being produced in a quasi wartime with real world operational requirements. So my guess is that the Russians could probably up that production, to around 100 or so Oreshniks a year. If it's 9 Oreshniks per regiment, we're talking about the Russians, and there'll be a reload capability here. Plus, the Oreshnik will be configured both for conventional and nuclear capabilities. So, let's say 59, 45. We're talking about the Russians being able to field before year's end, probably in the area of 4 to 5 regiments, a couple divisions worth of Oreshniks, and then they're just going to keep producing them. And this is a game changer. It fundamentally alters the strategic balance of power in Europe. There's nothing the United States or NATO has that can counter this, both in terms of its conventional strike, which is a new capability. The SS-20 was not a conventional system. It was purely a nuclear system. And in its nuclear mode, it just changed the way it put all of Europe at risk. I mean, this is the thing. Medvedev's tweet basically said, Europe, you committed suicide, because now you guaranteed any future conflict will ensure the destruction of all your beautiful cathedral spires. It's the end of Europe if they want to go to war. The Oreshnik literally guarantees the destruction, physical destruction of Europe in the case of a nuclear war. And the fact that Europe will not be able to ride out a conventional war without suffering immense damage. There's nothing in the world today that can intercept an Oreshnik missile. And so this is absolutely a game changer. Does it destabilize Europe? I actually think in this case, at this point in time, brings about stability, because Europe's going insane, literally going insane in terms of their anti-Russian rhetoric and things of this nature. There's nothing Europe can do to match the Oreshnik, and there's nothing the United States can do at the moment to match the Oreshnik. The United States is seeking to deploy what they call the Dark Eagle, a intermediate range hypersonic missile. It was supposed to be deployed last year, but we don't know how to build it. And so we have yet to operationally field this system. They're talking about maybe sometime in 2026 getting the Dark Eagle up there. But an interesting thing about Medvedev's tweet, it's not just about the Oreshnik. He said that, and other systems. The Oreshnik is a derivative of what's called the RS-26 Rubyezh, which was a missile that the Russians had under development, but it ran into problems because of the INF Treaty. The Rubyezh, deployed with a certain warhead configuration, could be flown to ranges below intermediate range threshold set by the treaty. But the problem is, if you put on a different warhead configuration, it could be flown to ranges greater. And once a missile's flown to ranges greater, it becomes an intermediate range missile as defined by the treaty. And the Russians didn't want to be seen as crossing over that threshold, so they put the deployment of the Rubyezh on hold. But the Rubyezh is, again, an SS-20 analog. It's a missile that was developed to fill the gap that was created in Russian strategic capabilities when the SS-20 was eliminated. What a lot of people don't realize during that time is that the Russians had built another missile called the Skorost missile. This was another intermediate range missile. It was built specifically for the Pershing II problem set, meaning that now when Pershing IIs, which are an intermediate range missile of the United States, deployed to West Germany, if the Pershing II went out of its, garrison and went into, an operational mode, the Russians didn't have anything that could immediately strike. Skorost means quick. And so the Skorost system was a system that was built to quickly respond to operational deployments of the Pershing II, so that if Russian intelligence, Soviet intelligence detected the Pershing II leaving its place, Skorost could be fired and terminate the Pershing II's existence before it could fire. The reason why I bring this up is that the Oreshnik is not the system to counter Dark Eagle. There will have to be a Skorost type analog produced to counter the Dark Eagle, so that when the Dark Eagle is deployed to Europe, if it goes to an operational place, there will be a new Russian system. And this is what Medvedev has alluded to. And I believe it's something I've been saying all along, that, the Russians will fall back on Soviet doctrine and Soviet, operational requirements set by the capabilities of NATO and the United States. And if we deploy Dark Eagle, there will be a new missile. It'll be the analog of Skorost. I don't know what they're going to call it. This is, again, game changer. It's checkmate in favor of Russia. People need to understand now that the Russians have dominance across the totality of the battlefield. I don't know if you saw Ukrainian drone operators do a post on Telegram, I think a couple weeks ago, where they mocked NATO. They said, we're getting our asses handed to us by the Russians, who have mastered drone warfare. They hunt us down and kill us before we can launch our drones now. The Ukrainians were doing pretty well in drone warfare, but now as soon as they deploy, the Russians have done pattern of life analysis of how the Ukrainian drones operate. And the second they go operational, the Russians are killing them, slaughtering them. This is why the Russians are making the progress they are in Pokrovsk and Sumy and elsewhere, where they used to be stopped cold by Ukrainian drones. They now just power right on through. And the Ukrainian drone operators got up and said, NATO needs to understand that a NATO-style army going up against the Russians will be dead in a matter of days, destroyed, totally destroyed. And that's just using drones. Now we throw in the Russian supremacy in the missile field. And they already had it with the Iskander, the Iskander-M, the Iskander-K, the Caliber, the Kinzhal. But now we throw in the Oreshnik, which will destroy every command and control center, every major logistical center throughout Europe. None will exist when the war starts. There will be no railheads. There will be nothing. It's all gone. Conventional Oreshniks will take it out. And then you throw in the Skorost, will take out the Dark Eagle and the other analog out there, including air bases. The Russians now are, in the, ability to totally mobilize their defense industry. They will produce missiles in the hundreds. They were producing 70 Iskanders a year. They're now producing 700. This is a game, set, match, Russia. How's the United States respond? Well, we sent nuclear weapons to England, B-61-12 bombs, understand that the Oreshnik will take them out too, along with all the other nuclear storage facilities. And then there's, Medvedev's famous or infamous, mean tweet. His mean tweet didn't say anything outrageous. It simply was a response to the stupidity of Lindsey Graham and others who threatened Russia with preemptive strikes. Basically saying, if you Russians don't continue this, we know how to do this. Ask the Ayatollah. It was basically a threat of, decapitation first strike by the United States. And all Medvedev did is say, and we got the dead hand. The dead hand is a Cold War system known as perimeter. It's real, even though Medvedev said, if it exists, it exists. I know. I inspected at least 3 of the missiles that are associated with this system back in 1990. Those were SS-25, since then upgraded to SS-27 variants. Without getting too much detail on it, if we attempted a preemptive strike and it succeeded, let's say we killed Putin and Medvedev and everybody, blew out their command and control and all that, and we tried to take out their nukes. The perimeter has sensors all over Russia, detect radiation, detect seismic waves, and they monitor communications. And when you get a radiation detection, seismic detection, and communications no longer function, then the dead hand kicks in. These missiles that I talked about are launched. They have a broadcast capability. They don't carry warheads. They'll put out the launch codes, and everything in the Russian arsenal gets launched immediately to the United States, and the United States ceases to exist. That's the dead hand. And all Medvedev said is, you want to talk about preemptively striking us? We got the dead hand, and you'll turn into the walking dead. Trump apparently didn't understand that because he does nuclear better than anybody. And he threatened to, or he said, I'm going to deploy Trident-capable Ohio-class submarines. Here's the interesting thing, and I'll leave it at this. This is why it's so dangerous. The dead hand was conceived in the late 70s, fielded in the early 1980s, out of a fear that the Pershing II / Ohio class / Trident capability gave the United States real preemptive first strike decapitation capability, especially if the Trident submarine comes close to Russian shores, Soviet shores, and fires the Tridents in a reduced trajectory, which eliminates being detected by long-range radars and provides shorter flight times. And that's why they built it. They built it because of the Trident. They built the dead hand because of the Trident, because of the fear the United States would put Ohio-class submarines near the shores and fire the Trident. So what did the president do? The president ordered 2 Ohio-class submarines to move closer to Russian shores. Now the Russian radars are going off all over the place. You know, Russia isn't looking for a nuclear war, but Russia is not going to sit back and let the United States, carry out a preemptive strike. Now the Russian alert levels have gone up. Last fall, the CIA assessment was that there was a greater than 50% chance of having a nuclear war before year's end. And back then I said there's a greater than 50%. The CIA happened to agree with me. And we were very close to a nuclear war last fall. We avoided it, thankfully. It's even worse today. And it's going to get worse. We have the New START treaty that expires in February. When that's gone, there is no limitation. We will see the nuclear arsenals in both countries skyrocket as they pull out nuclear warheads in reserve. Right now, the treaty allows 1,550 operational systems, but there are thousands of warheads in reserve. And some of the ways that we've dropped our operational system is that, for instance, we take the Minuteman III missile and we make it a single warhead. But we've already exercised putting multiple warheads. We've already done it. The United States military has gone in and put multiple warheads on Minuteman III as a test of capability. We can do the same thing with the Trident. We lowered the warheads. We can increase the warheads. Overnight, if this treaty goes away, we will go from 1,550 to over 4,000 deployed nuclear warheads overnight. And the Russians can do the same thing. And this thing will then escalate out of control till we're talking about 20 to 30 nuclear warheads per side at a time when we have an idiot president moving to. This is a recipe for disaster. I mean, can it be avoided? I don't know. I hope. I mean, Donald Trump actually told a TASS correspondent on July 29th that he can't imagine allowing New START treaty to expire. He said, these are the kinds of things we don't allow to expire. Then what are you doing to keep it in play? Where are the negotiations? They're not happening. What's happening is the president's mouth is running away, and we're in an extraordinary dangerous situation. Anyway, that's a long answer to a short question. I'm sorry. I'll turn it over to Larry.
No. It's all right. And Larry, your assessment, Scott brought up Dmitry Medvedev, and he had this to say about the Russian Foreign Ministry's statement on the withdrawal of moratorium on the deployment of medium and short-range missiles as a result of NATO countries' anti-Russia policy. This is a new reality. All our opponents will have to reckon with. Expect further steps. So, Larry, to you.
When I entered on duty with the CIA in 1985, September of 85, the preoccupation at that time was the issue of the deployment of the Pershing II intermediate-range ballistic missile to Europe. There were mass protests in a variety of countries in Europe against that deployment, but it was out of the fear that the Europeans had that they were now vulnerable to strikes from Russia with intermediate-range ballistic missiles, that the negotiations took place between Reagan and Gorbachev, and Ray McGovern was directly involved with all of that at the time, and it produced the INF treaty. It was in I think like December of '87 they finally signed it. Now, despite the tensions that existed between the United States and then Soviet Union, because remember we were busy funding the Mujahideen, these Islamic extremists in Afghanistan, and killing a lot of Russians, a lot of Soviet soldiers. Despite that going on, we were still able to talk and find a negotiated settlement here with the INF treaty, and it did in fact reduce and eliminated, for 38 years, until Bush dropped out of it, or Trump dropped out in 2018. So, roughly 33 years where that threat had abated. And as Scott did such an excellent job of pointing out, it's back, and it's back with a vengeance, because now you've got Russia uniquely equipped in a way that the West is not. And then when you get into the issues of air defense systems that are capable of shooting down either ballistic or hypersonic missiles, the United States and Europe has nothing. They have nothing that can defeat the Russian capabilities. But what's really alarming are the signals that are being sent by Washington while Donald Trump is president. Let's start with June 1st with the spiderweb attack that took place at the strategic air bases throughout Russia. Now they failed, but there still was showing an intent and the capability that was then of using the drones that was then replicated a month later, or I guess 2 weeks later, in Iran with the attacks and the decapitation attack that took place. So if you're a Russian military or intelligence analyst, you're sitting here watching, say, here's the West carrying out, helping Ukraine carry out these drone attacks. And I'm sure they did get assistance out of Azerbaijan to take out our nuclear air threat from the bombers. Then that's followed up by a decapitation attack in Iran. Then that's followed up with this General Christopher Donahue, just off the cuff at a NATO meeting, talking about how quickly the United States could overrun Kaliningrad and defeat the Russians. And saying that at the same time that Trump, and I don't know if Trump knew he was signing off on this, but Trump has to take the credit. He's president. Redeploys those nuclear gravity bombs, not just to England, but to at least, I think, 6 other NATO bases throughout Europe. First time that, we had withdrawn those in about 2008. And I don't know if the withdrawal back in 2008 was part of some treaty process or whatever, but the point was we were seeking to de-escalate the nuclear tension. Now we're doing this. And then on top of it, with Trump shooting his mouth off the way he was. I know that Judge Napolitano was interviewed by Dimitri Simes on the program that Dimitri hosts in Russia. And there were some Russian generals on there, and they were genuinely wanting to know, what the hell is the United States? Are you guys serious about this? So in the world of intelligence, the thing you want to do is remove uncertainty. You don't want to increase uncertainty and increase doubts. And everything that Trump is doing is leading to increasing doubts, increasing misunderstanding. And by that, you end up making the world more dangerous. And so I agree with Scott that I think we're in a far worse position than what the CIA projected last December.
Yeah, and Scott, you mentioned the New START treaty and its expiration and the dangers of that. Perhaps you could elaborate on this, given that you do have a project out. This is on your Substack. You have Project 38, which is a campaign centered on the production of a documentary film, 38 minutes, seeking to put nuclear disarmament back on the table as an American policy priority. So people can donate to that in the video description after the show. But talk about the dangers of this, given these latest moves, and how you put it all together into this project.
I mean, when the project was conceived, we weren't living in total insanity. I mean, it's become even more important now than ever before, but also more difficult to implement. The only good news is that the president appears to be at least cognizant of the fact that there's a treaty and it expires, and its expiration would be a bad thing. So that's a step in the right direction, because one of the goals and objectives of Project 38 was to, make sure the president was aware of the expiration and to try and convince the president of the absolute importance to extend this treaty, until which time a new arms control vehicle could be negotiated between Russia and the United States, probably even including China. Project 38, the name 38 comes from the 38 minutes of terror felt by the citizens of Hawaii in January 13th, 2018. When at 8 a.m, the emergency broadcast system of Hawaii sent out a warning that there was a missile inbound to Hawaii, and they were to seek shelter immediately. This is not a drill. And this was at a time when the Trump administration and North Korea were, flexing their respective nuclear muscles. And the feeling was that the North Koreans had launched a nuclear weapon against Hawaii and that they were all going to die. And for 38 minutes, people actually thought they were going to die. There's a lot of very emotional testimony from people about what was going through their head. Jim Carrey, the famous comedian actor, talks about being in Maui, and he got a phone call from his producer who said, missiles inbound, we're going to die. She said, do you want to meet? He said, I'm not going to spend the last minutes of my life driving to you in a panic. He said, I'm on the beach. I'm just going to sit out and look at the water and think peaceful thoughts and wait for it to happen. But people were convinced they were going to die. And so then it turned out it was an absolute mistake on the part of the emergency broadcast system. It was a drill that went live, and it was just a disaster. But the point is, the terror was real, and the fear of a missile inbound was real. And so Project 38 is the heart of it is a documentary film, 38 minutes, that I'm making, that seeks to capture those 38 minutes of terror. And the purpose to capture it is so that an audience is struck by the fact that when the missile's inbound, there's nothing you can do to make it go back. You're dead. You're literally going to die. And I want people to be put into that situation so I can ask them the question, now that you know you're going to die, if you could go back in time 6 months, what would you be willing to do to stop that missile from flying? You're dead. You're going to die. What would you do to stay alive? And then the question is, why aren't you doing that now? And what Project 38 is, the now. What are we supposed to do now? And the idea is to create a documentary film and then assemble what I call a team B of people who have served in the government in a variety of roles, to include advising the president on nuclear threats, disarmament, policymakers, etc. Team B is a concept that comes out of the 1970s, when the CIA produced a national intelligence estimate about Soviet missiles that the foaming in the mouth neoconservatives disagreed with. The CIA saying, you don't have to worry too much about Soviet missiles. And they want to say, no, we need a new arms race to justify the building of the Peacemaker, the Midget Man, small ICBM, rail-borne missiles, new submarines, the whole thing, B-2 or B-1 bombers, B-2 bombers in conceptual. And so they assembled a team B of outside experts who then put together their opposing view. What I would like to do, in recognition that the president is being advised by the worst people in the world, literally people who know nothing, are ignorant. He has some people around him who are good, but they need help. To put together a team B and seek an audience with the president or his senior advisors to brief them on this alternative viewpoint that'll be fact-based, based on reality, not on theory and not on ideology. To convince the president of the absolute necessity of extending New START. all I want is an extension. This is the easiest thing in the world. Extend it 3 to 5 years so that we don't have the cap removed, so that we can keep the cap low and we can begin a process of negotiation. But the Russians are like, what is there to negotiate? You don't even want to talk to us. You still have this ridiculous policy of seeking the strategic defeat of Russia. Why in God's name would we get rid of the one thing that prevents your strategic defeat from ever happening, our strategic nuclear forces? So there needs to be a whole bunch of changes underway. That's not the purpose of Project 38. That would be the purpose of what comes after Project 38. Project 38 is simply about extending the New START treaty and the measures there. So there are some things underway. The film is being produced. There's some other things I hope to announce in a week that are happening. The bringing together Team B, and then once we get that done, to begin a PR campaign to take the film out there, show it, to generate support. So that in December we can go down to Washington, D.C., hold a gathering at the National Press Club, get a large LED screen, mobile screen, put it in Lafayette Park and play the movie for the president, make sure it can be seen by the Oval Office, and seek the audience and make the case, and hopefully get the president to agree that come February 4th, I believe it is, that this treaty will not expire, it will be extended. But this is going to require a lot of work, both here in the United States and in Russia. I mean, we actually need the Russian help on this one. We need Russia to, indicate that it would be receptive to this. Right now, I mean, look, we just had the Russians say, you guys scrap the INF treaty. We're now deploying INF systems. This is tough. This is tough. The Russians are right. There's no reason, you can't say they're wrong to do this, but we're headed in the wrong direction. And so, Project 38 is, I think it's one of the most necessary projects that I could think of. I mean, I did Operation Dawn last year, which was designed to bring to the attention of the world the danger of nuclear war and trying to get candidates to commit to policies that would avoid it. But through the grace of God and luck and everything else, we navigated those shoals. And I think Operation Dawn helped. Danny, you were an important part of that. Larry, you as well. I mean, this was a team effort, and I'm looking for a team effort on Project 38. So you can go to my Substack, scottritter.com. You'll see the Project 38 button. You can read about Project 38. And, I hate to ask for money, but I'm just telling you, these things don't happen for free. I mean, just getting the National Press Club, which was essential to Operation Dawn. I just want to say the briefing we did at the National Press Club helped turn the corner to get things done that avoided a nuclear war, or helped avoid a nuclear war. But that's a $12,000 to $15,000 proposition, just renting that space. And this can only happen with help. So if there's people that think this is a good project, go to scottritter.com, go to the donate button and donate. I will tell you that the donations that have been received so far, I don't want to, I can't say anything right now, but this time next week, you'll understand what your donations did. And then by the end of the month, you'll understand, or I think mid-September, you'll understand even more. We have momentum. We're moving in the right direction. I'm very optimistic. And Larry, you've known me a long time, and I'm generally a pessimistic kind of person. I mean, I always try to do the right thing, but I'm always, well, it's tough to. I am extraordinarily optimistic, and you'll know more why next week. But it's only because of the support that's been received. So I want to thank everybody who supported this project to date, and I'll give preemptive thanks to those people who might be considering to support it. There's other things we do though. Waging Peace was a project that was stopped. Did I tell you, Danny? Do you know the good news? The really weird news?
What's
Larry,
that?
are you aware of this as well? I got my passport.
Look at that. Amazing.
And it's amazing when you get a passport, lots of options happen. Like you can begin waging peace again, which was going over to Russia and doing things to, capture that. Waging peace, also was stuff that we did here. As in June, we did a U.S.-Russian Citizens Summit, sort of a 40th anniversary of the 1985 space bridge. It was very successful, got a lot of attention. And there's people that want to continue that. So we will be continuing this, working to do various summits throughout the United States, and trying to get the Russians excited about that as well. Citizen diplomacy, it's a very important element of this. So the Waging Peace project is still on, and we're just going to keep moving forward. Look, Danny, Larry, this is a team effort. We are part of what I call a family of podcasts and a family of podcasters. We collectively have the ability to influence millions of people. The videos that we collectively produce, and we're pretty much all on the same wavelength. We may differ on, nuance here and nuance there, but we're on the same side, the same team, the same wavelength. When we put our minds together, we actually have greater impact than CNN, Fox, and others. And what we're doing here, what you're doing here today, Larry, what you do is very important. Just so everybody knows, Larry, you went to Moscow earlier this year and interviewed Sergei Lavrov. I mean, that's a home run kind of thing. You've done other meetings. You work behind the scenes. You work in the shadows, because I guess that's where you're comfortable working with your damn Hawaiian t-shirts. But yeah, I think you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I muted you. Sorry.
Yeah.
I said a face made for radio. Just keep me out of something.
Yeah, well, I mean, we all have a face made for radio. Unfortunately, we got this StreamYard, but the point is, collectively we can make a difference. It's us, the talking heads here, and it's the people watching. I mean, we actually have the ability to do very important work. This is what being a good citizen, both a citizen of the nation and a citizen of the world, is all about. So again, thanks for allowing me to talk about it, Danny.
Yeah, sure.
I've got a new book out again. I'm plugging the book, not because my publisher wants me to, although they'll be happy that I do it, but because it's relevant. It's called Highway to Hell. It's the Armageddon Chronicles from 2014 to 2025. There couldn't be a more timely book, because it's everything we just talked about is predicted in the book and discussed in the book and furthered in the book. This is about the absolute insanity, the insane road that we're on right now with Donald Trump and these non-experts, and the importance of arms control. So if you want a primer to bring you up to speed on why Project 38 is important, why extending the New START treaty is important, Highway to Hell is a good place to start.
Yeah, definitely. Well, everyone after the show can go to the video description and find all the places to support all those projects, and especially Project 38. But with that said, speaking of insanity, Larry, we can begin with you. As the Ukraine conflict deteriorates, especially for the U.S. NATO side, we see, for example, has been referenced many times, but back in July, this is what General Donahue had to say about potentially, believe it or not, the next front in this campaign that Scott characterizes as the campaign to strategically defeat Russia. Here's what he said.
If you look at Kaliningrad, and it's, you can argue back and forth, but it's about 47 miles wide, surrounded by NATO on all sides. There's absolutely no reason why that A2AD bubble, to deter Russia, we cannot take that down from the ground in a time frame that is unheard of and faster than we've ever been able to do.
And that's the only the beginning of the insanity on the part of the NATO side. Well, Trump's ambassador to NATO had these comments to say about Vladimir Putin. I think this demonstrates where both the U.S. and NATO side are when it comes to Russia.
Impossible to get in the mind of Vladimir Putin because it's sick and twisted and probably not logical. But, I'm guessing that he doesn't want to take on the most powerful military in the world, which is the United States of America.
So, Larry, to you, what do you make of this posture right now from the U.S. NATO side vis-a-vis Russia? Just go off.
Well, delusional. They're like the evil queen in Snow White. They keep looking in the mirror, mirror, mirror on the wall. Who's the biggest, baddest of them all? And because the mirror is programmed to say, oh, you're the best, you're the biggest, you're the baddest, they start believing it. Well, it's time for that mirror to speak up and talk back some truth. Now, let's start with Christopher Donahue, that general. This knucklehead, I think, has spent too much time at altitude with no oxygen. I think it's been fried some brain cells. This is not a Ranger push-up contest, okay? He was an Army Ranger. This wasn't seeing how many push-ups you can do. Let you tell us how quick we can take Kaliningrad. Okay, then what? Okay, how are you gonna resupply it? You're gonna concentrate any forces there? Because Russia's certainly going to be using nuclear weapons on you. Or now they don't have to worry about nukes. They can just use the Rushniks. That way they don't have to worry about any decontamination. I mean, just the thought that here's something that we can do tactically. Yeah, maybe you can do it tactically, but where does it put you strategically? And that's what these people are not thinking. And again, Whitaker, he's just... all I say to him is, how'd that Afghanistan thing work out? The most mighty army in the world. So don't tell me about how big and bad you are, because again, we've seen you, the United States, in the Red Sea. You can't beat the Houthis. You're running up quite a string there, Whitaker. So it's best to just shut your mouth, be quiet, stop talking tough, and figure out, how can we get along with Russia? Because Vladimir Putin may be many things, but sick, twisted, and illogical. Sorry, he is he's probably the most rational, logical leader in the world today, and he's had ample reason to get emotionally overwrought and react emotionally. I mean, we're sort of blessed that Dmitry Medvedev has not been president the last 2 or 3 years, because the Scott's estimates about probability of nuclear war would have gone up to over 90% if Medvedev was calling the shots. So what we're dealing with is a Western leadership and a Western elite that is completely out of touch with reality. We are confabulators. Confabulation is when you say something that's blatantly untrue, it's false, but you really believe it. And that's what's taking place with the likes of Lindsey Graham and Donald Trump and Christopher Donahue. They are confabulators.
Yeah, well, thanks for using that word too, Larry, because it reminds us of our friend Andrei Martyanov, who could not make it today, but he often uses that word to describe exactly what you're describing. But Scott, to you, your reaction to this, sitting on the Russian side, I can only imagine what's going on in their heads when they hear things like this. But your assessment, your thoughts.
Well, first of all, one clarification: does Andre use the term confabulator or
confabulator? But both would apply.
But let's just start with Kaliningrad, just so people understand a couple, basic truths. Kaliningrad is constitutionally part of Russia and is treated by the Russian Federation as an extension of the Russian Federation. So any attack against this, A2AD bubble, as Chris Donahue called it, is an attack on Russia. And Russia's nuclear doctrine is quite clear that if the viability or if Russian territory is threatened, then Russia will use nuclear weapons to protect it. So right off the bat, understand that it's not just this exclave that can be taken out by NATO with no consequence. Two, I mean, maybe Chris wanted to refamiliarize himself with the order of battle there in Kaliningrad, but it's a relatively small place, tightly packed with air defense, and oh gosh, I don't know, they have their own nuclear capable of Iskander missiles there. They have a corps station there, plus another separate Marine infantry brigade. Many of these people have been cycled through the special military operation. They have combat experience that everybody in NATO lacks. The idea that this is going to be a pushover is a joke. I just think Chris would be in for a rude awakening if he ever tried to do it before the Oreshnik took out his command center. Oh, by the way, General Donahue, you'll be dead within 3 hours of attempting this, along with most of NATO's command and control, killed by Oreshnik and other systems that'll take you out. NATO doesn't have combat forces capable of doing this. I don't know what he thinks about. They're surrounded by NATO, but on much of that flank that they're surrounded by, we're talking about Baltic countries with zero military capacity, especially when it comes to offensive military capacity. The Poles have 14 days worth of artillery. The United States force there couldn't survive more than a week and a half before it would need to be totally replaced. We don't have follow-on forces capable of doing that. So Chris Donahue is just smoking dope. Straight up smoking dope to think that Russia could actually defeat Kaliningrad, let alone the consequences of what would accrue should you try to do this. Why would he do this then? Because Chris Donahue, Larry, he's more than just a ranger. I mean, this man was a Delta Force troop commander, squadron commander, commanded Delta Force, did a number of JSOC things. So he's smart. He's got a good brain housing group. Why would he do this? Well, because I think he was told, or I think this is my assessment of Chris Donahue, because I actually sort of respect the guy. I think he took over and he was told by Cavoli, we're weak as hell. We don't have any capability. Right now, when you have United States starting to get into the FPV drone business, first person view drone, the kamikaze drones that we see operating all the time. And the U.S. Army put out a video that showed a soldier pulling out a training grenade. And we're going to now attach the grenade to the drone. And we pull the pin very carefully because we don't want it to go off. And then they fly it over. And look, we dropped it and we almost hit the target. We're going to keep practicing this, guys, because this is really cool stuff. If that's where we're at in drone warfare, it's over. And we're that way everywhere. We can't do anything, literally nothing. I challenge anybody to just tell me what you think we're going to do with a heavy armored brigade. Count the number of tanks, count the number of Bradleys. Now apply them to a drone intensive environment and start subtracting quickly because they'll all be dead. Try and logistically resupply them. You know how much fuel an armored brigade uses? How are they going to get the fuel there when all the lines of communication are cut, when all the fuel dumps are blown, when everything's blown? Because that's what the reality of modern warfare is. Donahue knows this. He was told by Cavoli, he knows this. He reported back to the Pentagon. They said, fake it. I think this presentation that was made was purely an exercise in bluster. It was chest thumping, puffing out by a man who knows better. A man who knows better. It was simply a statement designed to make the Russians react to you, to try and get the OODA loop operating in your favor while you're desperately trying to put together the pieces necessary just to survive. Because NATO has no strength. None. I know that I just pissed off a whole bunch of, USA types. You tell me what strength they have. Let's just do it. Let's rock and roll, baby. You just start walking me through the order of battle. You can't. I can walk you through the Russian order of battle. Are the Russians perfect? Nope. They have deficiencies? Yep. They make mistakes all the time, every day. But they've mastered drone warfare on a scope and scale that we can't even comprehend right now. They've mastered integration of fires. Their approach to air-ground combat is different than ours, but they've mastered it. We have no clue how to deal with fab bombs. The glide bombs that get dropped way the hell out here that come in and hit with pinpoint accuracy. We don't know how to do that. Do we have air defense? The Russians, when the Ukrainians bring in the Mirage and they start and the others, they start throwing these French bombs out there. The Russians shoot them down. The Russians shoot down air delivered bombs. When was the last time that was something that our air defense trained on, practiced on? Because it takes practice, guys. You actually have to learn how to operate your radars and not operate your radars, in peacetime mode, full on, full power. No, you'll be dead in 5 minutes. We're talking about waiting for the radio cue on real quick, learning how to read the screen, turn off, transfer over to another one, integrate it in through line, and get some sort of picture to begin an intercept solution. We don't know how to do it. Russians are doing it all the time. Every day they're shooting down, HIMARS, they're shooting down ATACMS, they're shooting down bombs. This is the reality of modern warfare. And unless you're doing it on a daily basis with a level of intensity that somewhat replicates reality, you're not doing it. NATO doesn't know how to do it. I don't know what they think they're going to do, but they're not going to do it. They're not going to do what the Russians are doing. And the only way to get to that point is through training. And training's too damn expensive anymore. We don't train. Larry, you know this. You know about training. Yeah. Look, when I was in the Marine Corps, way back in the day, I used to walk to school uphill and walk home uphill. We didn't have buses, but I was in a field artillery unit in 29 Palms, California. This one battalion, we fired more live rounds for one battalion in a year than the entire Marine Corps fires in a year today. And that's the only way we became proficient, was we were in the field all the time, every day, firing, shoot, move, communicate, adapting our tactics, innovative training. It cost a hell of a lot of money. Today, we spend nearly $1 trillion a year on defense, but look how much of it goes to training. Not that much. And when we train, a lot of it's done on simulators. And I'm here to tell you right now, you can't learn on a simulator. You need reality. We don't do it. We don't know how to do the job we're supposed to be doing. We don't have the skill set. And if we take it and adapt it to, and we're called upon to do it in reality, we'll be slaughtered. Those Ukrainian drone operators were 110% correct. So yeah, I agree with Larry. Chris Donahue shouldn't have said what he said. I know why he said it, but this is the time when you actually take the 4 stars off, put them on the table and say, nah, boss, we got to be real here. We have to stop provoking the beast. And just one last comment on Whitaker. At a time when diplomacy is absolutely essential, I think the only way we're getting out of this is for Putin to sit down with Trump and for them to hash out something together. And it'll be done in a way that Russia's going to get what it wants. But in order for that to happen, Trump and Putin have to feel comfortable operating. You don't hear, it's open warfare on Donald Trump's brain. I mean, the Russians could get away, Russian officials every day could legitimately get away with calling the man, senile, stupid, a moron, whatever. You don't hear a single word like that out of the Russians. Not at all. Why? Because they're keeping the door for diplomacy open. You don't sit down and have meaningful discussions with people you call what Whitaker called Vladimir Putin. Whitaker's a moron. He was a prosecutor for the Southern District of Iowa, went after meth heads by, throwing a book at them. I'm not saying that was the wrong thing to do, but that's all he knows. Never served in the military. Doesn't have a foggiest clue what it means to be in the military, fight a war. And he's also not much of a diplomat, because what he did is undermine any chance the president has of moving forward, in an effective manner with Russia, because you just don't have an ambassador of NATO calling the president of Russia names and then expect the president of Russia to go, yeah, hey, I'm ready to sit down with you. No, it's insulting. So Trump is just being failed across the board. I'm not saying Trump is the greatest thing since sliced bread. We know he isn't. But if he had better advisors, better people surrounding him, people who didn't undermine Trump on a daily basis, maybe we could find a way out of this absolute disaster we have that's U.S.-Russian policy.
Yeah, well, to your point, Scott and Larry, you can comment on this too. Vladimir Putin said exactly what you just said with regards to diplomacy when he was with Alexander Lukashenko, the president of Belarus. This is what he said, and it's almost word for word what you just said. All disappointments. Hold on, let me mute that. All disappointments come from excessive expectations. That's a well-known general rule. Here we go. But in order to approach resolving the issue by peaceful means, thorough discussions are needed. Not in public. This needs to be done calmly in the quiet of the negotiations process. So it's literally that's what diplomacy actually is, and it's exactly the posture that Russia has taken. But Larry, we're hearing all sorts of chatter from NATO itself, despite all the things that Scott just said about its weaknesses. We hear chatter everywhere about 2027. We hear that Russia is going to be ready for war with NATO by 2027. So NATO needs to wage war with Russia by 2027. We had Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk say that. General Alexis Grenouchich, NATO's Supreme Allied Commander and head of U.S. European Command, say this. We're hearing this all the time now. So what's your thoughts on this 2027 number, and any comments on what Scott laid out?
Well, the 2027 number is just, it's a made up number. Europe's trying to figure out how they're going to stay relevant. They have no strategy for dealing with the reality that's unfolding right now. And that reality is the Russian offensive is accelerating. The Ukrainian ability to resist that offensive is deteriorating with each passing day. I've been burned before making predictions about, it could be over by this, that, or the other date. But the trend line we're seeing now, and the fact that the Russians are moving not just in one area, but they're moving in Zaporizhia, they're moving further south in Kherson, they're moving up north around Kharkiv, they're moving in Sumy, and all the advances are to the west or in the direction of Ukrainian lines. We don't have a single place along that line of contact where Ukraine's able to assemble a force and punch a hole through the Russian lines and force the Russians to retreat. They were able to do so in the fall of September of 2022. And that's when, Russia, I think, had made a number of false assumptions about what Ukraine was going to do and what it was prepared to do. And so particularly up in areas around Sumy and Kharkiv up north, Russia got driven out, and it was an important setback. Similarly, it was General Surovikin who said, look, we got our troops down south in Kherson. They're on the west side of the Dnieper River. If they get cut off, we will have no way to resupply them. We'll have no way to reinforce them. So we're going to withdraw. And he withdrew them back across the territory and then proceeded to put in place lines of defense, which is come June of 2023 when the NATO plan, NATO designed counteroffensive that the Ukrainians launched, that was going to take them to the Crimea and they'd be bathing in the Black Sea in August, that was launched, and it was a complete failure because Russia had learned to adapt and adjust quickly to the changing circumstances on the battlefield. And what we're seeing right now is the failure of Ukraine and the West to make those kinds of adjustments. And in some cases, the West might say, we need to resupply the Ukrainians with artillery rounds. And let's assume that right now the Ukrainians were, if they had functioning artillery barrels, they'd be firing 5,000 rounds a week. Okay, well, right now the United States can produce a grand total of 40,000 a month. So all of a sudden, we're going to run out of shells. I take that back. The Ukrainians are firing at 5,000 a day. So, in 1 week, a little over 1 week, you're going to use up what the United States can produce now in an entire month. And it's not just confined to that weapon system. It's confined to the same situation with tanks. The United States is no longer building M1 Abrams tanks. They're taking existing tanks and refurbishing them. Hey, and they can get you a new one in 2 years. Patriot missile systems. Yeah, we built 500 of those missiles, 500 to 700 of the PAC-3 a year. And we understand that Russia's firing 500 to 700 drones and missiles in one night. And then if you have to use, let's say, a minimum of 2 Patriots per each of those, good Lord. So you've used up 1,400 and 700. So you've used up 2 years of production capability in one day. What happens the next day and the day after that? So what's taking place with this situation right now is there's not a single area you can point to where Ukraine can say, hey, we've got dominance, we've got superiority, we've got better technology in any area, whether we're talking soldiers, the weapons the soldiers are using on the front lines, mortars, artillery, RPGs, drones, combat aircraft, bombers, hypersonic missiles. Just give me one area, electronic warfare, just one area where you can point and say, boy, yeah, Ukraine's definitely, they got an advantage there. And they can say, well, they got the backing of NATO. Well, that's turned out not to be such a great advantage either. When you've got guys that, the U.S. has been unable to win a war since the end of World War II. So, it's not right now. I would argue that the average Ukrainian officer has far more combat experience than any officer in the U.S. military.
Yeah, well, I think this is a good place to talk about the battlefield situation. We get a bit more detailed on this, Scott, because we have CNN sounding the alarm saying Russia's summer offensive is turning into an escalating crisis for Ukraine, especially in the Pokrovsk area. And we also have something I like to note, because in addition to Western mainstream media reports, if you just read, and mind you, your sanity might be damaged by reading such things. So if you just read what, let's say, Vladimir Zelensky says when he talks about, for example, conversations with Donald Trump, nowhere in here is there anything about the battlefield other than Russian attacks. So I think that says a lot about what's going on. But Scott, if you could give analysis, because I take it that a lot of the actions, behaviors, and reactions from Donald Trump's administration, Donald Trump, NATO, have something to do with this. Well, I mean,
first of all, what is the first casualty in war is truth, and look at Trump just throwing out made up numbers. Somehow the Russians lost 20,000 dead in a month. Ukraine has only suffered 8,000 dead since January. My understanding, based upon conversations with people who were at the front line and some other anecdotal information, is that the Russians are losing 150, 200 dead a week. That's a lot. I understand that 200 dead a week broke the back of the United States during the Vietnam War. So this is not a insignificant number. And, so we're looking at the Russians, dropping 600 to, 800 men a month. A lot. That's bigger than a battalion. But that ain't 20,000 a month. The Ukrainians are suffering, depending on where you're at, they're dropping on a daily basis close to 1,500, 2,000 guys, dead and wounded, a day. These are unsustainable numbers, and yet they can't tell the truth, so they flip the script, and it's the Ukrainians that are losing guys that they in numbers they can't replace. And what's happened here is that the Ukrainians are actually at a juncture right now where they don't have enough troops left to, even with the recruitment they're doing. And just so everybody knows, not everybody who gets sent to the front line is getting popped on the head. The vast majority of Ukrainian troops that are being, mobilized are being mobilized in a normal fashion. They show up, they get processed, they get trained, and they get to the front lines. But the Ukrainians don't generate enough forces to replace the casualties. And so every day that goes by, they're getting weaker. This isn't just me and my analysis saying, this is a Ukrainian parliamentarian announcing this on the floor of the Rada saying, you guys got to be real here. You know, we can't replace our losses. We get weaker every day. The Russians, on the other hand, get stronger every day because, yes, they're suffering losses, but they're recruiting far more people. Far more people. It's not even, you know, and so not only are they replacing the losses at the battlefield, but they're beginning to assemble, you know, viable reserves, hundreds of thousands of men, which give them great flexibility when the time comes. But this allows Russia to maintain pressure. Ukrainians are very capable soldiers. They're better than anything NATO's got going right now. Even the United States Army couldn't do what Ukraine's doing on the battlefield. Couldn't survive the way Ukraine's surviving. I'm sorry, U.S. Army. That's just a statement of truth. They're battle hardened. They have sound small unit leadership, and it's certain areas when they have good middle management and senior leadership, they can stop the Russians from advancing. And given the right equipment, they can launch counterattacks to push the Russians back. Guys, that's not the end of the world. You have studied, you know, military history. You do know that even when the United States was beating the Nazis in April of 1945, if you read the unit diaries, you know, 1st Battalion, 460th Infantry made an assault in here, but were counterattacked by the Germans and forced to fall back a kilometer and a half. Yeah, that's war. Read about the Russian advance on Berlin. The Germans are counterattacking up until the last moment. And when you counterattack and you pick the right time and place, you can push the enemy back. So the Ukrainians have the ability to stop the Russian advance in certain areas and launch counterattacks to push the Russians back. But they can't do that because in order to assemble those forces, they have to rob Peter to pay Paul. And we're at the point right now where if the Russians in the vicinity of Pokrovsk, you know, the Russians stopped doing the frontal assault because the Ukrainians brought in troops. But where the Ukrainians brought in the troops, there's no troops to replace. They have to thin it out. And then the Russians just simply shift over, begin to advance. This is what's happening. They're creating an encirclement by advancing on the flanks. I think the left flank, the southern flank, is sort of stopped right now. And so now they're making all the progress here. If the Ukrainians shift their forces up north, then the south will make it. And then when they shift to both, cover both wings, the center will advance. It's just the way it works. And it's happening all up and down the front line. The Ukrainians pulled some people out of the Zaporizhia area to come up and reinforce. The Russians started advancing to Zaporizhia. Can't stop them. We need to stop them in Sumy, so we pull people out of the Kupiansk area. But now the Russians are moving on Kupiansk. Wherever they pull people out to plug a hole, the Russians advance. That's the advantage that they have. And they're advancing at a greater rate of advance than they have at any time. The Russians still aren't doing the full up, big arrow stuff. The Russian attacks, I think I've described this before. I'll just go through one more time. This is explained to me by an officer in Abdi Alidanov's Akhmat Special Forces. He talked about mastering the 3s and the 6s. Because, Larry, you know this, when I went through, I did, fire team rushes as part of a squad advance, as part of a platoon advance, as part of a company advance. A fire team is 5 Marines, and we're doing fire team advances. That means one fire team rushes up, squad commanders controlling it, platoon commanders controlling it. You do that today, you get killed. Yeah. The Russians today, their assault group is 3 men. That's it, 3 men. They're supported by drones and everything. They got a drone overhead. They got artillery coming in. They got a drone team. There's a lot more Russians behind the scenes with the drones, bringing the drones in. But the assault team is 3 men. That's the 3s. And they will assault the position that they're on, generally defended by between 7 and 12 Ukrainians. And they kill them, or they wound them, and they take them prisoner. And as soon as that assault team can fail. They get killed. They withdraw. All right, you lost 3 guys. But generally speaking, the assault team will take the position, and then the 6s come in. The 6s are the men that rush forward to consolidate that position. Now you get 9 guys on target. You dig in, and you wait until the next assault. But that's what we're doing. We're talking about 3-man assault teams all up and down the field, assaulting a position, supported by drones and fire support. When things go south, you lose 3 guys. The reason why I want to emphasize this point is, do you know how many defeats the Russian would have to, have doing 3s and 6s to lose 20,000 guys a month? Okay, I'm just a simple Marine.
I can't do that.
Doing the math on that one. This is why I believe people who are fighting that say. I will also say this: the Russian wounded, and your number of wounded is generally reflective of your casualty rate on the battlefield. Although speaking to Mariat Karelin, he says there's days that go by where the Russians don't lose a single guy dead. They lose wounded, but nobody's dying. But the wounded used to be are evacuated to medical facilities in the rear. Back in 2022, 2023, these facilities were working overtime. I mean, the just wounded were just flowing back. Today, they're there, but the numbers have dropped way down. So that's anecdotal evidence that you're just not getting the flow through of casualties to be reflective of a 20,000 dead. Because if you're talking about 20,000 dead, you're talking about 60 to 80,000 wounded. That means the Russians losing 100,000 guys a month in terms of casualties, and a total force structure of 700 to 800,000. It's insane numbers. Why the president is speaking these numbers is beyond me. Why people allow him to say these numbers, because it just discredits him, discredits his credibility, discredits his team. It means nobody takes you seriously, because if you're that far removed from reality, the reason why I'm going through these details, guys, so your audience understands, there's no way in hell that these numbers are accurate. They're not. There's nothing out there to sustain them. The evidence is exactly the opposite. This is why, people are like, Scott, you're so pro-Russian. You got your nose up the Aladana. Yeah, because he's a frontline commander, and I learn a hell of a lot. And then I talk to other people too. Talk to the drone operators. Talk to the guys who provide the logistics resupply. Talk to guys who affiliate with the special forces and what they're doing. And you get all the information. Yes, it could be slanted and not the whole story, but when you get it all and you average it out and you compare and contrast, start matching the numbers, the picture that shows up is that the Russians are advancing across the entire length. There's nothing the Ukrainians can do to stop it. The Ukrainians don't have enough troops to, plug the holes, let alone build a reserve capability. And the Russians, they keep saying the Russian summer offensive. I don't know, Danny, Larry, I checked the calendar. We're sort of like midway through August. Summer's here, guys. So
yeah.
It just proves that we're not talking about calendar-driven events. I mean, the Russians aren't about looking at a calendar. Larry and I have made the same mistake, and I'm with Larry. I'm done pulling out the crystal ball. When the Russians win is up to the Russians.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say they're winning because, again, Larry's probably from the same school that I am, hyper aggressive. I don't understand 3s and 6s and drones. I don't. I'm beginning to. I'm starting to learn. But I'm about pushing the assault forward, consolidating, and continue to exploit victory until you can't exploit anymore. As long as the enemy's retreating, you advance. And that's just the way the Marine Corps taught me. This is why we took Kuwait City in 3 days when Norman Schwarzkopf thought we never could take it, because we don't quit. We just keep going. We keep going, keep going. Well, that's not what the Russians are doing. They're doing something different. They're doing the attritional warfare thing, where 3 assault soldiers are taking out 12 Ukrainians. And they're winning. They're prevailing. And they understand that this conflict isn't just about the battlefield. It's about the economy, which is not going well for the Ukrainians. It's about politics. It ain't going. Did you see the SVR's press release the other day, Larry? We're about the secret meeting in Switzerland. I don't know if it's true, but what it did is it built upon things that we know are happening. We know Zelensky's meeting with the Swiss president. We know that Yermak meets with the national security advisor. We know the Ukrainians have had meetings with the United States and the United Kingdom. We know Zelensky has positioned himself to repeat. So the Russians have put together a report that totally undermines the credibility of the Ukrainian government. So you have this one dictatorial president, Zelensky, that everybody says has to go. And we have to preserve Ukrainian democracy. And we preserve Ukrainian democracy by picking handpicking Zelensky, who is a Banderas Nazi, by the way, and bypassing the electoral process. This creates instability, political instability inside Ukraine. So you have economic chaos, political instability, and military disaster. And the combined effect is designed to collapse Ukraine as a functioning nation state. That'll happen, I believe, inevitably, but it'll happen on a timetable dictated by Russia, and it's not predicated upon what we in the West want to happen on a given calendar date.
Yeah, well, Larry, I definitely want your detailed analysis. What Scott was saying about the battlefield in this article that does mention the summer offensive, which is well underway. They do report the things that somewhat, not in as great detail as Scott, but for example, in the Konstantinivka and Pokrovsk area, they just talk about the swift change and control of territory and the importance of drones in that. But Larry, your assessment of the battlefield situation and anything you want to comment on, especially with regard to Scott's close there about the bigger implications and the interconnected implications of it all.
Well, anybody who's listening, because I want to help you understand the revolution that's taken place in warfare that we're witnessing on the battlefield in Ukraine. Go out in front of your house, pretend that you're carrying an automatic weapon. Pretend or imagine that you're now going into an area that's occupied by an enemy. And you've got to figure out where they are. And if they're in an entrenched position, that they more likely are going to be protected if you try to shoot at them. So figure out, how are you going to move up that street? And that was sort of the situation even the Russians were in 3 years ago. But here's what the situation is now. You're that person. So you get you detect an area where you think the firing is coming from. So you get a drone in the air that's able to surveil and tell you who is exactly in what position. Are they hiding behind the house? Are they out behind the tool shed? Are they over to the left? Or are they over to the right? Then, instead of having to call in artillery, you can call in a drone which functions like the most precise artillery in the world because it carries a charge that can specifically hit, go through a window, go through a door. And what we're talking about is that soldier now is in instant communication with the drone operators and with the commanders. Now, I'm sure Scott has been through some field exercises where in the old days where you're carrying like a Prick 77 radio, which, weighed a ton, and then you had to have batteries to keep that thing up. So all of a sudden there's an entirely new logistics trail that gets added on to this modern effort. But what the Russians have achieved is a full integration. The Marine Corps, and I'll brag for Scott at this point, since I was trained by a Marine colonel. The Marine Corps was different from the Army in particular because Marine officers growing up were trained to do combined arms. So they were trained that they could call in airstrikes. They were trained to call in artillery strikes. They were trained to be able to bring in naval gunfire. They weren't just limited to one option. They had a broad range. The Russians have taken that and now have it on steroids. And they are literally writing the book on the transition to modern warfare with a whole variety of drones that are both FPVs as well as drones which are for observation and intelligence collection. And they've been doing this on the fly. They're making it up as they go along, but it tells us something else about the nature of the Russian army. It is adaptable. It's not locked in as many Western military analysts have wrongly believed to old practices and bureaucratic structures and rigid hierarchies. No. These folks they're testing stuff on the battlefield, and if it doesn't work, they're able to go up to chain of command and say, "This is bullshit. This doesn't work. We're not going to keep doing that. This is how it works." And as Scott noted, they're in no rush. They're not on a clock. This is not like a football game where you're in the fourth quarter and you've got 2 minutes left. You got plenty of time. And I had asked General Brzezinski, a retired general, when I was in Moscow in March, and asked him specifically the question, why hasn't the general staff ordered all the bridges across the Dnieper to be taken out to cut off the line of communications? And he laughed and he goes, I've been asking that myself. But then as we got into it, it appears that part of the general staff strategy was if they felt if they shut down those lines of communication across the river, and then there was no way to start resupplying what army and military presence of Ukraine was left on the east side, that it would not have attrited the NATO capabilities as well that were embedded. And the goal is to attrit, not just Ukraine, but attrit NATO. And as we now look back over the last 3.5 years, it's turned out to be a damn effective strategy.
Yeah, and perhaps we can close on your comments on this, because Scott, I'm curious on your assessment of, is the military woes on the battlefield of Ukraine, and of course their backers, does this explain why we see not just Donald Trump, but the entirety, Europe, etc., or the entire collective West, are 100% in on relying on sanctions, which we've heard over the last several years were the most effective weapon? This is Donald Trump's promise for more sanctions.
They seem to be pretty good at avoiding sanctions. You know, they're wily characters, and they're pretty good at avoiding sanctions. So we'll see what happens. But Steve is focused right now on. So
in the beginning, just to clarify, he said that there will be more sanctions, but we don't have to actually move into that. But because I can show you this before your comments, Lindsey Graham, these sanctions, these tariffs, both of them are going so far that now they're targeting India. So India is supposed to be a strategic cog for the United States against China. But now India is being targeted for its oil trade with Russia. And Lindsey Graham, who some have surmised is a huge part of Donald Trump's foreign policy making, was very appreciative when Donald Trump talked about how there's going to be massive tariffs for India, not only buying massive amounts of Russian oil and then selling on the market. They don't care how many people are being killed in Ukraine, and because of this, tariffs are going to be substantially raised. So, Scott, how do you see that? What do you make of my assessment that it seems that sanctions, tariffs, these things seem to be attempting to make up for the lack of success in the most important realm, at least from the standpoint of how this all began, with the hope that Russia would fall?
Well, I've always said that the sanctions aren't a policy. Sanctions are what happens in the absence of policy, meaning that when you don't know what to do, sanction. And what the United States has done with this is that we've turned this act of impotence into a long-term strategy of destabilization. And so that was the approach we took with Saddam Hussein, where we slapped sanctions on and just kept them on until which time we were able to, bring about the collapse. This was the Syrian strategy. And it's a strategy that we're trying to apply against Russia. But as the president has said, Russia are wily characters, and it's not going to it's not going to work. But I think what you're seeing with everybody jumping on the sanction bandwagon is that we just don't have any other viable alternatives. But they don't understand that we are unable to implement the sanctions that we seek. China's told us to pound sand. India has told us to pound sand. Brazil has told us to pound sand. Basically, everybody in regards to this has told us to pound sand. These sanctions are going to have no impact. I'm sort of curious to see what the president is going to do on Friday. But he may be escalating us towards a major economic confrontation with the world, with BRICS. He thinks that this is going to destroy BRICS. I personally believe that this is going to solidify BRICS and be the glue that brings BRICS together. This is bad policy, but it's because we don't have a policy. We don't have a Russian policy. We don't know what we want to accomplish. It's nonsensical what we say about Ukraine and what our goals and objectives are. We don't have a NATO policy because we can't afford what he says. I'll leave it at that. The president right now is bragging about $600 billion that the EU has promised him to invest in America. I get to invest wherever I want. It doesn't exist, Mr. President. Ursula von der Leyen admitted that she doesn't have any control. There's no $600 billion. There's nobody lining up to give you that money. The $720 billion of energy purchases over the course of 3 years, it's a made up number. It can't happen. I mean, I think Europe bought $76 billion total per year last year. How do you get that to be now $250 billion a year? The United States only produces $310 billion worth of energy, and we're not going to suddenly reallocate that all to Europe. Europe couldn't receive $250 billion worth of U.S. energy because it's LNG. That's liquid natural gas. You have to have a place to receive it. You have to offload it. You have to have the deliquefying facilities. Europe doesn't have that infrastructure. It's a totally made up number. Everything this president does is a totally made up concept. And right now we simply don't have any way to leverage or to put pressure on Russia other than the threat of sanctions. But as the president said, Russia is not going to blink at all, and neither are the nations that are working with Russia.
Yeah. Larry, bring us home. What's your assessment of this seemingly just absolute reliance on sanctions as the primary weapon now, as the battlefield becomes just stagnant for the United States and the collective West, untenable?
24 years ago, in the year 2000, the United States was the major trading partner of 75% of the world. So if you did a global map of it, most of the world, and we'll associate blue with the United States, 75% of the world was blue. Today, when you ask that question, which country is the major trading partner of the majority of nations? It's like 80% now are majority trading partners with China. China and the United States have completely flipped roles. Sanctions and tariffs can be powerful tools if you're in the position the United States was 24 years ago, but not today. If you're the only supplier of rare earth minerals, then if I decide to sanction those, put a sanction on those so that I'm not going to ship them to people outside that need it, those countries outside are going to be in trouble. Likewise, if you, the United States, are putting sanctions on me, China, and because of that, China says, okay, screw you. I'm not sending any more rare earth minerals or magnets, which you absolutely need, or pharmaceuticals. Now, all of a sudden, the power arithmetic is changed. It's the United States is vulnerable, not China. And so Trump is living in a world that doesn't exist anymore economically. He thinks it's still 2000. He thinks the United States is still being able to call the shots. So look at what happened with, we told Brazil, okay, we're not going to sanction orange juice because, if we sanction orange juice and the tariffs on that go up, we're going to have a lot of pissed off people who drink orange juice. But we are going to tariff your coffee. And what did the Brazilians do? They didn't go, oh my God, we've lost, that the United States are the only people in the world who drink coffee. They went, no, okay. They just signed a new deal with China. You know what? There are a lot more coffee, even though they drink tea in China, still a lot more coffee drinkers in terms of total numbers than in the United States. How about pork, soybeans? The Chinese actually at the start of tariffs, man, they bought a lot of soybeans out of the United States, just piled up because they got it in store. But now that the tariffs are kicking in, they're buying from Brazil and from Russia. So the point is, if you impose sanctions work if you have monopoly control. Tariffs work if you got monopoly control. But if you're living in a competitive world where you're not the sole source, and in fact you're just one of another group of guys or countries, then it is a counterproductive, damaging strategy.
Yeah, and I just pulled up that reference mainstream media reporting on what you're saying, Larry,
Yeah.
regarding Brazilian coffee. And if you go to China, you know how big of a deal this is, because Chinese domestic brands for coffee are very important and popular. So the fact that China is willing to open up their market just goes to show how far all of these countries are willing to go to counter the tariffs, counter sanctions. It's definitely a losing gambit.
Yeah.
Gentlemen,
I mean,
anything else you'd like to say? Oh, Larry, please.
I was just going to say, the U.S. is going to discover it's no longer relevant, and that's the problem. We think we are.
Yeah. Anything else you'd like to say, Scott, before we conclude here?
I'm just going to double down on what Larry said. That, and this is horrible as an American, but we're no longer the exceptional nation, or what was the other term that was used? The indispensable nation. We're the irrelevant nation. We simply don't matter. The coffee thing is a perfect example. China is what, 1.2 billion people, more maybe. The scope and scale of their markets dwarfs anything we have going, and China is fully capable of adapting. And when the world adapts, because the world economy has been expanding, when the world finally realizes that they can live without America, that there's nothing America produces that the world needs, and the American consumer can be eliminated. I mean, because that's the thing that we consume. Well, other people consume too, like the Chinese drinking coffee. They will find solutions to everything we do. And one of these days we're going to wake up to where we're alone. We can't even call up a help center anymore, because we'll have sanctioned India to the point where they'll shut down all the kind of people that help me navigate through my Verizon billing plan. So it's over for the United States. We have become the irrelevant nation. And then what do? Have a temper tantrum, threaten everybody with nuclear weapons? I mean, it's that crazy.
Yeah. I think that's a good note to end on. I want to point everyone to the video description before you head out of here. That has both Scott's Substack to the donations page for Project 38, also Sonar 21, which is what Larry Johnson manages, his blog. Be sure to go there, support, follow his work. Also, hit the like button before you go. That helps keep the stream going after we are through. And then all the places in the video description to support this channel are also there. So Patreon, Substack, and much more. Without further ado, everyone, I'll see you all Thursday morning with Alistair Crook. And until then, bye-bye.